thank you very, very much, and thank you so much for coming out on Saturday afternoon when many people are doing many different things that they personally want to do as opposed to find out about how to help animals. So I just wanted to expand a little bit to explain because about our organization, because it folds into the talk that I'm giving. Animal Alliance of Canada is a 22-year-old organization, and when we were founded in 1990, we decided not to become a charity because we decided that politics was where change actually needed to occur. And as a result of that, that's how we spent most of our time is in the political realm. In 1999, we evaluated what wins and losses we had and how many animals we had actually helped and what the body count was at the end of the day and whether we had actually made any improvement. And indeed, we had a number of pretty spectacular victories over that period of time. But what we had not been able to do is to produce a fundamental change in how people think about animals and relate to animals. And so we formed an organization called Environment Voters. It was our electoral and political arm of Animal Alliance. And then in 2005, when it became quite illegal at the federal level in Canada to be involved in any real way politically as what we call a third party, we formed a political party by the name, the soundbite name of Animal Alliance Environment Voters Party of Canada. A bit of a mouthful, but we are registered with Elections Canada as a formal party, and we run candidates during elections, and in between speak out about animals and the environment. And our mandate, both at Animal Alliance and our party, is to protect all animals and the environment. And we do that primarily through electoral politics and legislative advocacy, but also through education and rescue. So today, I've been asked to talk about how politics affects the lives of animals and how politics has prevented animals from having the kinds of protections that most of us want them to have. In 2001, in preparation for an animal protection symposium, 3 lawyers, Leslie Visgold, who we heard about earlier, Wendy King, and Jennifer Stopford, authored a paper called Anything Goes, an overview of Canada's legal approach to animals on factory farms. In that paper they state, and I quote, "Legally, however, particularly in the area of food production, Canada has failed to keep up. Canadian laws and practices still reflect the old idea that animals are nothing more than production units, to be used in the most economically efficient manner possible, even although that perspective has long lost its factual base." So although this paper was written 10 years ago, over 10 years ago now, the situation of Anything Goes still applies to almost virtually every animal that we have in Canada and how they are treated. We have achieved very few significant advances in improving animal welfare laws in Canada. And of course, we've had victories. We've had very important victories, won by a great deal of hard work by so many dedicated campaigners like many who are in the room today. But sadly, we have yet to achieve a paradigm shift in how human society relates to animals. So it is the case that the East Coast seal hunt continues, despite being opposed by the majority of Canadians, and despite the investment of millions of animal protection dollars in trying to stop it. And it is the case that dogs, many of whom we see as our beloved companions, can still be exploited and cruelly treated as fighting dogs, as research subjects, as bomb detectors, as puppy mill dogs, and so on. There are many reasons why animal protection issues seem so difficult to solve and why real substantive change seems so elusive. My presentation today asserts that even though we know that politicians and governments hold enormous power over the laws and regulations and policies governing the treatment of animals in Canada, we, the animal protection community, are largely absent in the electoral and political process. Most groups stop lobbying during elections, during the very time that politicians are most vulnerable, need their job back, and are therefore most receptive to our demands. My presentation asserts that as a result of our absence, significant change to animal protection legislation is severely curtailed. My hope is that today we can acquire some knowledge that political power, and I use that term in the broadest sense, is extremely important to winning greater legislative protection for animals in Canada. Politics. So this is the impacts of politics on animals. Politics affects all human and non-human animals. Virtually every aspect of our lives are impacted in some way by politicians. The difference, of course, is that we humans have many legal and constitutional rights that protect us from the vagaries of politics. Animals are afforded no such protection. Under the law, animals are property, no different than toasters and televisions, but with much less value. The decade-long debate about amending the animal cruelty section of the Criminal Code pointed to an entrenched political position, that it was politically untenable to move the reference to animals out of the property section of the Criminal Code and into a separate section which allowed for the recognition of the sentience of animals. And the Liberals knew that there was no demonstrable political benefit that would balance the political risks to actually taking such an action. How else can one explain the total defeat of a bill put forward by a cabinet minister in a government that held majority in both the House and the Senate? As many of us remember, the Criminal Code debate raged on for a decade and was accompanied by a continuous weakening of the proposed legislation. And in the end, only the penalty section of the Criminal Code was amended by the Conservatives in keeping with their law and order agenda. And how else can we explain why provincial governments all across Canada continue to implement weak and ineffective animal cruelty and animal welfare laws by exempting animal exploitation industries from prosecution? For animals, politicians decide who lives and who dies, whether treatment is humane or acceptably cruel. Politicians decide which animals are commodities and which are companions, which animals have freedom and which are confined, and which animals are protected and which are exploited. The fate of Lucy the elephant in the Edmonton Zoo will be decided by a legal challenge to a political decision. The harp seal hunt continues because of the electoral necessity of winning the East Coast seats, particularly the 7 seats in Newfoundland. And puppy mills continue to flourish in Ontario despite added powers granted by the Ontario government to the OSPCA, because it is politically problematic for governments to ban puppy mills. I want to just touch on the impact of our non-involvement in the political process. So despite the tremendous power that politicians hold over animals, inexplicably, we ignore politicians. I hear people talk about them all the time. They avoid them, they disregard them, they consider them sleazy and untrustworthy, and our collective disregard is reflected, I think, in the electoral process. So when you look at who voted federally, approximately 40% of eligible voters simply stayed home last May 2nd. Over 50% of eligible voters in Ontario did not vote last fall in the same year. And in 2010, close to 60% of the voters stayed home during municipal elections. Given that many of us just simply stay home and are not involved in the electoral process, not even to exercise our right to vote, we should not be surprised that just as we ignore and dismiss politicians, they ignore and dismiss us because of our detachment from the political process. However, we know when we are engaged, politicians are more inclined to support our requests. And I have a very clear example which occurred a number of years ago in Winnipeg. For a decade, a group there had tried to get the city to ban the sale of dogs from the municipal pound to the University of Manitoba for research. Some 200, 300, 400 dogs, all very young, went to the university for acute and chronic experimentation. A pretty disgusting thing all in all. And they continually lost that request. So we were asked by them to come and assist, and we did. Mayor Glenn Murray was the mayor then, who is now elected in Ontario in Rosedale riding for the Ontario Liberals here, held an entrenched view that this practice was simply an evil necessity and refused to discuss it with us. So we approached other councillors to assess whether we would have any support to win this issue, and found 4 stalwart souls who were brave enough to join us in our fight. So we chose our timing to launch our public campaign around a municipal election, testing our theory that we might win if we rewarded those politicians who supported our position and punished those who didn't. So during the city election, we supported 4 councillors in their re-election. We went out, we canvassed for them, distributed literature, took out ads, etc. In addition, we ran radio ads against Mayor Murray, in which it said, if Mayor Glenn Murray can't run a dog pound, what makes you think he can run a city? It was a fantastic ad. Everybody chuckled about it. And at the end of the day, 3 things happened. First, the councillors who we supported were re-elected. And although Mayor Murray was as well, his plurality was significantly reduced. So we achieved our reward and punishment message. Second, animal groups in the city used the campaign to continue the debate. And third, 3 weeks after the election, council voted to end the practice, just like that. So we know we've been able to repeat these kind of victories by understanding how politics works and by exercising responsible political power. However, having said that, the vast majority of us do not understand and are not involved in the electoral process. And this, of course, spills over to our lack of involvement in legislation and lobbying campaigns. And so it should come as no surprise to most of us that we have very little working knowledge about the political process and how change occurs. And we have a spectacular example of this, and I know many of us in the room were involved in this push for to kill Bill 47, myself included. But I just want to point this irony out. Bill 50, which was tabled by the Liberals in 2008, received very lukewarm public engagement. And yet the Liberal government fundamentally changed the OSPCA Act by exempting most recognized legal uses of animals, including hunting, trapping, farming, and others, and continued to exclude the OSPCA from protecting 1 million research animals by not allowing them in research laboratories. Contrast the tepid reaction to Bill 50 and the fundamental change that occurred there to the visceral reaction that occurred at Jack McLaren's Bill 47. Bill 47 was designed to gut the OSPCA Act and render it ineffective in prosecuting those charged with cruelty. And of course we should be opposed to it. However, unlike Bill 50, the McLaren bill had no hope of being enacted in law and died at second reading. But enormous energies, we all put these in, and we're all well-intentioned by them, were devoted in killing this bill. It has become clear to me in my conversations with people who are deeply caring about animals that most have no working knowledge about the difference between a government bill and a private member's public bill. I have to admit that I was both elated and saddened by the reaction to Bill 47. Elated that so many people were sufficiently angered that they felt compelled to be involved politically. Saddened because of the absence of this visceral reaction for Bill 50, where substantive change was really occurring. This demonstrates that most of us have only a rudimentary knowledge of how laws are actually created and how they are altered and how they are enforced. Most people who call about animal cruelty issues believe that both the Criminal Code and the OSPCA Act prevent cruelty. And largely that's not the case. Both are really designed to allow legal intervention, including in the case of the OSPCA seizure, when there are allegations of animal cruelty. And so we find ourselves so angry when agencies like the OSPCA fail to protect animals who are cruelly treated. We saw the outpouring of raw anger in southwestern Ontario, in this very region, when the OSPCA failed to remove the 1,200 to 1,400 puppy mill dogs in the recent investigation into a large number of puppy mill operations. And we ask ourselves, how could these investigators walk away from the dogs in those barns? So my question to everybody is, so why are we angry at the OSPCA for enforcing its act and not against the politicians who created a badly flawed piece of legislation? Both Ontario Conservatives and Liberals claim to have given the OSPCA the tools needed to go after puppy mill operations, but have they? So let's take a rational look at this issue. 1,200 to 1,400 dogs were identified in this one investigation. We all suspect that this is just the tip of the iceberg and that there are many other similar operations out there and many more animals kept in horribly squalid conditions. So how, in reality, could the OSPCA handle those numbers? In fact, they could, but at an enormous expense, as we saw in Quebec, where 600 dogs were seized from a puppy mill operation, and an enormous effort, the Humane Society International Canada and HSUS housed and found homes for those animals. We were all excited by this initiative and grateful that the dogs were given a second chance at a better life. But in reality, it was one mill in a province littered with mills and no end in sight. And the same reality exists in Ontario. And this question is not, or my question about this is not meant to excuse the OSPCA from its responsibility. As you may know, I've been one of its most ardent critics, and I believe that the OSPCA has failed to use its power to change laws to help animals. However, the OSPCA Act is fairly prescriptive in setting out policing powers of the OSPCA agents, and the Act dictates how investigations occur and how animals are dealt with. I would argue that the OSPCA is not and cannot be an animal protection change agent. My criticism of the OSPCA and other SPCAs across the country is that they allow themselves to be used as political pawns in the animal protection business. Provincial governments have seized upon this and largely opted out of animal cruelty prevention business. They have handed the responsibility over to private agencies who are predominantly funded by donations from generous folks who love animals and want them protected. This is obviously a very sweet deal for provincial governments. Governments control the powers of the SPCAs at minimal cost. They avoid having to implement any real change in legislation that might protect animals and do not have to deal with the complaints because the industries are largely exempt from any prosecution. And when people like you and me complain, we are directed to the SPCAs, which are private entities with no requirement for transparency or accountability to us or other members of the public. The real core problem with the SPCA is that the government mandates an unaccountable, non-transparent private police force to enforce public legislation with minimal funding that not only governs other entities but also the SPCA itself. This problem was forced into the spotlight when the OSPCA seized control of the Toronto Humane Society in 2010 and charged a number of individuals with cruelty. The media coverage was spectacular. However, the issue never went to trial, and we will never be able to really find out what actually happened there. But while investigating the THS animal cruelty, the OSPCA itself was dealing with its own controversy, the ringworm controversy, as many of you may remember. It was alleged to have a virulent strain of ringworm in the shelter and decided that they were going to kill all 350 animals in the shelter to get rid of the ringworm. A huge controversy erupted, and only 99, only I say, tongue-in-cheek, of the 350 animals were killed, the others were saved. The point of this story is that the OSPCA was in charge of investigating itself and did so by shutting its doors and shutting down much of its communication with concerned citizens. This in sharp contrast to the often daily media briefings by the OSPCA about the THS controversy. It is my view that we cannot stand and allow the OSPCA to be the sole arbiter, animal cruelty arbiter. We in the animal protection community must not allow governments this political out. So we recommend that, as we did to the Ontario government in 2008, that they actually set up an entity within the police force that would actually do animal cruelty investigations like proper police work. So finally, just very briefly, thinking about how change actually occurs. I think we often are hugely discouraged because the problems that we face and look at are too big and too many for any, that we feel are too many for any real change to happen. And because we are so few and our opponents are so many and so powerful, because we try and we lose repeatedly, and because they have all the power and we feel like we really have none. We begin our day with this incredible weight of defeat on our shoulders, and somehow we all today clawed out of that defeat aspect, out of the trenches, and came to figure out how to fight for change. It makes me exhausted thinking about it. So I think we need to understand and draw strength from the way in which change occurs. And it occurs in very small increments. And a seismic change occurs, it is a result of many small incremental changes that have gone on before. Ending slavery in the United States, the fall of apartheid in South Africa, ending child labor in developed countries, the right of women to vote, all of these significant changes occurred after years of small incremental victories. But what is truly exciting is that change is not only possible, it is entirely achievable. And it is easy to learn how politics works to make it happen. Going to politics school is free and always available. Politicians are required to talk to their electors and must do so. By visiting a politician and presenting an idea for change, one begins to learn the process. See what that politician has to say. Volunteering to assist a politician will help one learn what pressures this politician faces in making daily decisions in their office, and then how those decisions would be made about when animal issues are then become present. And when the election is called, working for a candidate and use it to deliver the best possible protection for animals. So, my friends in the room, I think we should feel good about the work that we do. We should celebrate every victory that we win, because those victories will help change how we live and how we treat non-human animals. Politics is the path to facilitating more victories and to speed up the process. And I urge you to become a political animal and force our elected officials to enact real protection for animals through legislation. Thank you.